Every year, fantasy football is defined by a few players, and a lot of times they're the usual suspects. Guys like Lamar Jackson and Jamar Chase in 2024, Christian McCaffrey in 2023. But there are also players that come out of nowhere as middle or late round picks and massively exceed expectations. We saw this from Nico Collins in 2023, Baker Mayfield in 2024. So for today's video, I went looking for players outside the early rounds that I believe have league winning upside. And I'm pretty excited to share the names that I came up with. So let's get into this one. My name is Paul. This is Pure Potential. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment. Let's go. Now, before we get started, let me lay out the parameters that I set for myself for picking out these players. I didn't want to pick out guys where the breakout is already priced in Dynasty League. So I didn't take anybody that is already priced inside the top 3 rounds of startup ADP. Players like Drake May and Ladd McConkey are great bets to break out, but they're also, open secrets, right? Everybody knows those guys are really good young players that have a lot of scoring potential. So nobody inside the top 3 rounds. And I also didn't want to pick players that are already projected to have smash seasons. So I didn't take anybody inside the top 3 rounds of ADP on Underdog. That eliminates guys like Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Devontae Adams, your older veteran players that everybody knows are going to score a lot of points, but aren't expensive in Dynasty due to their age. I also have disqualified rookies from today's video. Obviously, guys like Bowers and Neighbors and Daniels, those were among your biggest hits in all formats in 2024. So don't worry, I'm not ignoring rookies. I'm going to do a separate video just like this one with a particular focus on rookies that I think could make a big impact this year. So make sure you subscribe if you don't want to miss that one. It's also important to remember that in Dynasty, a player's absolute ceiling is just one piece of the puzzle. It's an important piece for sure. We care about upside in Dynasty. I actually moved several different players up my rankings after researching for this video, but we still have to understand the full range of outcomes for these players and the likelihood of each of these outcomes. So I don't want you to walk away from this video and think I need to get these players on my teams at all costs. I just want to open up your mind to some possibilities. It's not to say that these upside cases are the most likely outcome or that they're likely outcomes at all, but just sort of thinking through what's possible for these players in 2025 and maybe shed a little bit of light on where upside actually comes from in the first place. So let's get into the players now, and we're going to go in descending order of startup ADP. So the players are just going to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. I'll probably have to do more and more mental gymnastics to really make the upside case, but we're going to start with a pretty straightforward player, and that's Breece Hall. And now I am cheating already here. I'm breaking my own rules because technically Breece Hall goes just inside that 3rd round on Underdog. He's the 35th overall player, but I had to include him because the case is just so compelling. Now, for what it's worth, I didn't cheat on the Dynasty side. His Dynasty startup ADP is in the early 4th round as the RB8. So only cheating a little bit on the redraft front. But with Breece Hall, the upside case is just so easy to see. Right? He smashes as a rookie through his first 7 games, tears his ACL, comes back the next year, actually plays all 17 games, gives us a nice 17 points per game season. He was the RB6 in 2023. But if you actually zoom in on his season, it was even more impressive than that because he was very clearly eased back in through the first 4 games. He had lower efficiency, mostly lower carry counts, although he did have kind of a big week 1. But if you just isolate his weeks 5 through 17, so not even including the 29 points that he scored in week 18, because I know that, doesn't count for fantasy or whatever, just weeks 5 through 17, 19.3 points per game. And he had a 17% target share to go along with 2.14 yards per out run. So he was a high-end RB1 for most of the season, and his receiving numbers in particular were elite. I mean, he was a 1st rounder last year for a reason. The upside was made obvious for us in 2023. We needed him to play with a quarterback not named Zach Wilson or Mike White. Obviously, in 2024, it doesn't work out. He's in this stale Nathaniel Hackett, Aaron Rodgers offense. Immobile Aaron Rodgers makes running basically impossible. It was very difficult to run efficiently when your quarterback basically can't move. Breece Hall himself, he did deal with some nagging injuries. He had some small stuff flare up, but the entire offense was struggling. They couldn't get to 20 points per game as an offense. Garrett Wilson was held under 2 yards per out run once again. And the receiving work dipped a bit. It didn't entirely disappear. He still had a 13% target share. He still had 1.5 yards per out run. That's not in line with the 2023 numbers, but it's also not like a concerning level of bad. It's still pretty good as far as running backs go. I mean, it was still a top 5 target share number amongst all running backs and pretty efficient despite the offensive worries. But if we zoom out, has the bet on Breece Hall really changed since last year? Obviously, he's a year older, but from a redraft standpoint, how has the bet really changed? He just turned 24 in April, so he's still quite a bit pre-age apex. Am I really supposed to believe Breece Hall is washed at 24 years old because he wasn't efficient in a terrible offense? You can't even cite the ACL as like a real concern like you could for a guy like Javonte Williams who's never gotten it back. We saw Breece play as one of the best running backs in the league in 2023 after coming off that ACL. And then you look at the rest of this team, Braylon Allen is not good. Okay, I refuse to stand for this. Okay, Breece Hall was more efficient per carry. His explosive run rate was 5 times higher. He still dominated all of the inside the 5 work last year at 88% of the inside the 5 carries. So Braylon Allen isn't coming in to be like the goal line back or anything. I don't buy this as a committee whatsoever. And then we have this new offense coming in. Obviously, basically the biggest change you could possibly make at quarterback, going from Aaron Rodgers to Justin Fields. I can tell you for sure that's going to help the run game efficiency, because when you have these mobile quarterbacks, it's been well documented that running back efficiency goes up because defenses have to account for the mobility of the quarterback. You have these RPO things that can open things up. And then you also have a new OC, Tanner Engstrand, basically the first coach out of the Ben Johnson coaching tree. We know how successful that running game has been with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. So that's a potential pathway to improvements for Breece Hall. And we know the pass volume is going to be lower in 2024, but Justin Fields, unlike most mobile quarterbacks, has a really high checkdown rate. And the lack of other weapons for the Jets leads me to believe that Breece Hall is going to get a lot of targets this year. Justin Fields last year, 14.9% checkdown rate. That was by far the highest of any quarterback that started at least 5 games. And in 2023, it was a little bit lower, but still quite high at 12.7%. And that's even more amazing when you consider that the running backs he was throwing to were Roshan Johnson, Khalil Herbert, and Deontay Foreman. I mean, none of those guys are adding any value as pass catchers. And I think that really demonstrates that this is a tendency for Fields, because there's nothing about that running back room that's like, we need to get targets to these running backs. That was just Justin Fields playing football the way that he plays football. With Breece Hall on the other end of those passes, I have no doubt in my mind that he's going to be going there pretty often. So I love buying Breece Hall in Dynasty right now. I mean, the price is really palatable relative to his upside. And for me, there's a bit of a drop off once Breece Hall and Henderson are off the board. I know a lot of people like Jonathan Taylor. His price is actually really close to Hall. I don't think the upside's really there for Taylor in the same way. Then you get into like Kyron Williams, Quinshon Judkins, Josh Jacobs. I don't think any of those guys have the same kind of upside right now as Breece Hall. Now, if you've been watching this video and wondering, where am I getting all of these numbers? Where did I find Justin Fields' checkdown rate? How did I know what Breece Hall scored between weeks 5 and 17 2 seasons ago? All of this stuff is coming from the Fantasy Points data suite, which is an absolute go-to for me, preparing pretty much any video at this point, but it's really useful even in my own personal analysis. So if you have any interest in seeing the actual underlying metrics, advanced stuff for running backs, quarterbacks, even team level trends like pass rate over expectation, you can go to fantasypoints.com/plans and you can get 10% off the Fantasy Points data suite using my code PURE10. And that's going to run through all of the rest of this offseason and all of the NFL season as well. Anyway, our second player here going in descending order of startup ADP is Kenneth Walker, who is the 604 RB18, and no more cheating. Kenneth Walker is well outside the first 3 rounds on Underdog. I really feel like the injuries last season are overshadowing the fact that Kenneth Walker was actually the RB12 in points per game. And that was despite averaging just 3.8 yards per carry due to outrageously bad run blocking. Walker was still the extremely elusive and explosive running back that he's been his entire career. You can look at this chart here from Ian Harditz. I mean, I can't think of a better way to demonstrate what Walker is doing. Nobody was avoiding more tackles per carry or even close than Walker last year, but the efficiency wasn't there because the blocking was atrocious. Now, what buoyed Walker's fantasy production was a drastic increase in targets. He wasn't much of a pass catcher in college. He wasn't used much as a receiver his first 2 years, but last season, he was 5th in the league in running back target share at 12.7%. That was higher, just barely higher than Bijan Robinson. It was higher than Jahmyr Gibbs. And that's really what allowed him to finish top 12 despite having just 52 rushing yards per game. And that pass game usage, which I think will carry over based on comments we've gotten from Clint Kubiak, the continuity at head coach, that usage is going to raise both the floor and the ceiling for Kenneth Walker moving forward. And then you look over to the run blocking. I can't promise you that it's going to magically fix itself, right? Like, it was a really bad offensive line last year. It could be bad again this year. But the switch from Ryan Grubb to Clint Kubiak at OC could absolutely help. According to a Fantasy Points article from Ryan Heath, Clint Kubiak's going to be bringing his outside zone scheme from New Orleans to Seattle, which is good news for Walker. I mean, Kamara's coming off of his most efficient rushing season since 2020. And as Ryan writes in the article, Walker averages 4.54 career yards per carry on outside zone, reflecting a 13% efficiency boost compared to all other carries. In contrast, Zach Charbonnet's averaged just 3.67 career yards per carry on outside zone, 21% less than his average on other carries. So not only is this outside zone scheme perfectly tailored to Kenneth Walker's strength, it also works against Zach Charbonnet's strengths. It's a weakness for him as a running back. So I don't think we should expect some kind of even split between these two. I think Walker's going to remain the clear bell cow. And for what it's worth, this is what Clint Kubiak said last month when asked about Walker in relation to this outside zone scheme. He said, looking forward to him in this scheme, we're going to ask a lot out of him. Now, look, that's a vague quote, right? But again, the evidence points to this being a really good development for Walker. Now, are there legit injury concerns with Walker? I mean, probably. He's missed games every year of his career. He had multiple different injuries last year. It's totally possible that he's more prone to injury than the average running back. And the Seattle offense could struggle again with Sam Darnold at quarterback and a bad offensive line. That's all in the range of outcomes. I think it's also priced in at a 6th round price tag. And I believe that there is absolutely top 5 scoring upside for Walker if Darnold and the offensive line can just find a way to play competent football. So I think Walker's pretty reasonably priced in Dynasty startups right now. And I think he's 100% a better pick at cost than James Cook, Josh Jacobs, and Kyron Williams, who are all going at least a full round earlier right now. Next, we get to a wide receiver in Chris Olave, who goes at the 6'12", wide receiver 24, over on Dynasty Data Lab. Now, the wide receiver position is gross. I struggled to pick out good candidates from the group of wide receivers that is neither a top 3 round redraft pick or a top 3 round Dynasty pick. As I mentioned in the startup strategy video from last week, there's just not a lot of obvious upside at the position outside of the known elites. But Chris Olave has been very efficient on a per route basis dating back to his rookie year. And really, the knocks on Olave are not personal to him as a player. They're about the injuries he suffered and the bad offenses that have limited his fantasy output. Now, those are both valid reasons to discount him a bit in both Dynasty and redraft. But if we took concussions off the table for a minute and we just compared the underlying efficiency metrics of Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave across their careers, they're really pretty similar. In fact, Chris Olave has actually had a better yards per out run every year of his career than Garrett Wilson. It's not really particularly close. He's had a better targets per out run in 2 out of 3 years. Wilson's had a slightly higher target share, especially in 2023. And he's run a lot more routes because the Jets have thrown more passes and he's been healthier than Olave. But I don't think that there's really a massive disparity between these two. And I've got another visual here, I think was originally shared by Ian Harditz, that I think demonstrates what company Olave's been keeping as a wide receiver. Like, he's not been some replacement level wide receiver. When he's been on the field, he's been very efficient. You can see yards per out run versus targets per out run. He's in the same range as Drake London. He's not that far off from like Brian Thomas, Ladd McConkey. He's a good wide receiver. And if we're willing to bet on Garrett Wilson in the 3rd round with Justin Fields as his quarterback, why not bet on Olave at a 3-round discount? I know Tyler Shuck is a meme and he's probably terrible, but also we get quarterback evaluations wrong all the time. Very few people thought Bo Nix was going to be able to support fantasy relevant options, and Cortland Sutton had his best season in years, right? So who knows with Tyler Shuck, but sometimes the unknown is really where upside can come from. And then you can look at the addition of Kellen Moore as the head coach. I talked about this in the veteran sells video a while back, but Kellen Moore always ranks very highly in total plays per game. He's been 4th, 7th, 8th, 2nd, and 7th in plays per game as an offensive coordinator dating back to 2019. So I think it's very plausible that we see higher total play volume out of this team, probably going to have to throw the ball a bit more. It's not like the running back room really lends itself to high volume rushing. Like Kamara is more of a pass catcher. Kendre Miller and Devin Neal are totally unproven. So yeah, the quarterback's probably bad, but the running backs aren't that inspiring either. They're probably going to be losing a lot of games. So I don't know. I can paint the picture here of a wide receiver that has struggled to put all of it together so far in his career. But age 25 season, finally gets through a healthy year. Those peripheral numbers come to fruition. He runs more routes, dominates targets for this team that really doesn't have any good pass catchers other than Rashid Shaheed. I can see the case for Olave. I think he's totally reasonably priced, actually discounted at this borderline late first value that he's sitting at in Dynasty. Next, we'll get to our one and only quarterback today. And this is probably my most straightforward upside case on the whole list. It's Justin Fields, another Jet, going at the 709 in startups, the QB 23. This is straightforward because everybody knows Justin Fields has upside, but I do want to talk through it a little bit. According to Fantasy Points data, Justin Fields has ranked 4th in fantasy points per dropback over the last 3 years, just behind Lamar, Hurts, and Allen. Pretty good company. Justin Fields rushed for over 1,100 yards in 15 games in 2022. He scored 20.5 points per game. He followed that up with 18.4 points per game in 2023, and in his 6 starts last year, he scored 19.2 points per game. So obviously, it's no secret that Justin Fields scores points when he's on the field. And I think we can be pretty confident that he's going to be on the field all season for the Jets, whether he's good for real football or not. Okay, just examine the evidence here. Justin Fields' backup quarterback is 35-year-old Tyrod Taylor. The Jets have a new head coach, Aaron Glenn, new OC, Tanner Engstrand. Those two guys are unlikely to feel immense pressure to win games late in the season. I think they're going to have a little bit of a leash with this being their first year. I don't think they're going to turn to Tyrod in weeks 15 or 16 or 17 because the team is out of the playoff race. They're just going to ride it out with Fields, especially because the contract structure, the contract that Justin Fields signed, basically guarantees that he's a Jet next year. Okay, 2-year deal. Next year, he is a $23 million cap hit with a $22 million dead cap hit. So they save basically no money by cutting Justin Fields. The team needs this to work out. This is not some bridge quarterback situation where the team is looking for any excuse to move on to the next guy. There is no next guy. Justin Fields is the guy right now, and they really can't get rid of him. Now, if they lose enough games to draft a quarterback highly next year, they might go that route. But again, we're talking about 2025 upside. And I think we're getting 17 games out of Fields. He at least has a really good wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. He has a really good pass-catching running back in Breece Hall. And we've seen this elite production from him with Arthur Smith and Luke Getsy calling the plays. Obviously, we don't know if Tanner Engstrand is any good at this, but it's not a very high bar to be the most innovative coach that Justin Fields has played for. And we're talking about possible upside here. We're talking about best case scenario. So I want to think big. And I absolutely think Justin Fields could be a top 5 fantasy quarterback this year. Like it's really not that hard to picture how that could happen. And I think he's pretty reasonably priced in Dynasty. Like he's an especially nice buy, in my opinion, on a higher value team, maybe where you already have 2 stable quarterbacks. Like if your quarterback room is Herbert and Stroud or Purdy and McCarthy, I can see Fields outscoring those guys, and maybe he loses his job at the end of the year, but you still have those other 2 quarterbacks. And your opportunity cost right now to get him, it's like Chuba Hubbard, Matthew Golden, add a little plus onto Joe Mixon or something. Like he's not being priced highly, which makes sense because he doesn't have long-term security. But for what he can provide to your team right now, it's not really that different than going out to get like a Derrick Henry or something, right? Derrick Henry, 31-year-old running back. This could be his last year, but you think it's going to be a really good year. It's not that different to go out and get Fields and say, yeah, I'm going to get 19 points per game this year, and then he's probably going to go to 0. That's a totally reasonable investment at his price. All right, our next player is a tight end, and I'm looking for a career resurgence from Mark Andrews. For a long time, Mark Andrews, he was that third tight end that was mentioned alongside Kelsey and Kittle as the best fantasy options. He actually had a tight end 1 overall finish back in 2021 with a ridiculous 1,361 receiving yards and 9 touchdowns. He obviously has not been able to follow that up with anything close in the year since, but he's only the 904 in startup drafts right now, the tight end 9. So obviously his recent years production has been factored in. But one thing that I think is encouraging is his yards per route run is held steady. 2.23 in 2021, 2.06, 2.11, 2.05 in the years since. So concern that Mark Andrews has drastically declined, probably overblown. Right? He's seen his role reduced a bit, which has hurt his fantasy production, but I think he's still a very good player. It's also important to remember that he was injured to start 2024. He got in a car crash just before the season started, and he was also coming off of that tightrope procedure to deal with his ankle injury in 2023. Recent history has kind of shown us that that can take a full year to recover from. We saw last year Tony Pollard had a big jump in efficiency from 2023 to 2024 because he was a full year removed from that tightrope surgery. So we could see maybe Mark Andrews' role was reduced last year in part because of that injury, because he was at a much higher route percentage the previous 3 years. If you remove the game in 2023 that Andrews got hurt in, he was around 79% route participation. In 2024, that was closer to 60%. So right there, you can see there's a lot of room for the role to grow. And the other thing I think is overblown is the concerns about Isaiah Likely. There is a pretty serious, unironic him. Likely is a good player, but I don't think there's any evidence he's better than Andrews. I don't think the team would be better if they turned to him. So yeah, he's going to maintain a role because he's like the 4th best pass catcher on the team, and their wide receiver 3 is terrible. But I don't think there's any risk of Likely overtaking Mark Andrews. But what's the path to upside here? How do we get from the 12.7 points per game he scored last year using tight end premium scoring back into that 17 to 18 points per game range that would put him, close to the Kittle McBride range of tight ends? Well, like I said, Andrews has maintained his efficiency on a per route basis. So what we really need is to see him running more routes. Again, Isaiah Likely is not going anywhere. They're not just going to put that genie back in the bottle. He's a good player. He makes the team better. But one path for Andrews to run more routes is if the team simply runs more 12 personnel. Right now, the wide receiver 3 for the Ravens is DeAndre Hopkins. He is probably washed. He's at best a situational player. I think there's precedent for more 12 personnel from the Ravens. They only ran it 31% of the time last year. And we have seen teams in recent history run more 12 personnel than that. The Falcons, for example, in 2023, with Kyle Pitts and Jonnu Smith, they were at about 41%. So you could get that number up a bit, let Likely and Andrews be on the field at the same time more often. That would obviously allow Andrews to score more fantasy points. But a 10% increase in 12 personnel is not going to get us all the way there. So how about more pass attempts? There are a lot of ways the Ravens could throw more passes this year, but the 2 main ways that I can picture are, number 1, if Derrick Henry gets hurt, there is no running back on this team that can even remotely replace his workload. They've got Justice Hill. They've got Keaton Mitchell. Maybe they still have Rasheen Ali kicking around back there. There is nobody taking on that work. What would likely happen in that case is they would switch to a more pass-heavy approach, more pass attempts, more fantasy points. But also, the Ravens' defense could be worse if they find themselves in more shootout game environments. Again, more pass attempts, more fantasy points. And then you also have, this isn't really pass attempt related, but if Isaiah Likely were to get hurt, Mark Andrews would probably run close to a full route share because Charlie Kolar is really just a blocking tight end. So if they were, if that was to happen, even if Zay Flowers were to get injured, that would probably tilt to more 12 personnel. So there's just, at his price, I think there are a lot of ways that things can break favorably for Mark Andrews. And the beauty with him, unlike other players, is that we already know he can do it. We already know what he's capable of. So you're not making a blind bet here on a contingent upside situation. You know there's a talent floor, and then there are outs to higher end production on top of that. And the tight end position's a little bit of a wasteland, as it always is. Like Powers and McBride are priced way, way, way up. The guys that have them are not going to trade them to you. I'm sorry. George Kittle's pretty expensive too. If he's on a contending team, they're going to make you pay up for him. So where do you find upside at the position? I think at cost, David Njoku, Evan Ingram, Jonnu Smith, those guys are totally fine. But I do think Andrews is probably still the most talented player of that group right now, and he's very affordable. All right, looking for running back upside a little bit further down the board, let's talk about Tyjae Spears. 10th pick of the 12th round in startups right now, RB 39. Rookie year was pretty interesting for Mr. Spears. He ran the ball just 100 times for 453 yards. But remember, that was on a team with Derrick Henry. He also caught 52 passes for 385 yards. He had a 13.8% target share, which was 7th among all running backs. He had a 25% targets per out run. Really impressive receiving numbers from Tyjae Spears as a rookie. And then he has this injury-riddled year 2. We thought he was going to play more of an even role with Tony Pollard. That didn't happen, mostly, I think, because he had an ankle sprain and then a hamstring sprain and then a concussion. He missed 6 games during the season and parts of other games as well. And he was just never like in the flow of the offense because he just kept missing games. But he was still a much better receiving option than Pollard. He had 30 receptions last year in 12 games, and his yards per out run, pretty high, 1.45, was 20th among running backs. It was a lot better than Pollard. Pollard had just a 0.88 yards per out run last year. And that was 0.89 the previous year, his last season in Dallas. And this is interesting because I was listening to the Late Round podcast, JJ Zacharyson, great listen, an episode recently, the name is escaping me right now, but he talked about running backs and how yards per out run can be predictive in following season target share. So in other words, sometimes running backs find themselves in a position where they get a lot of targets one year, but they're not efficient with those targets. And then the next year, we typically see those targets get redistributed to other backs. And so I think it's really easy to picture Tyjae Spears taking on a larger role, especially in the passing game, if he can just stay healthy. And we know the upside is there with Spears because he was one of the most dominant running backs in the fantasy playoffs last year. Look at this tweet from Ian Hartitz, highest scoring running backs in the fantasy playoffs. We've got Gibbs, Taylor, Cook, Robinson, and there's Spears at running back 5. He scored 62 points across weeks 15, 16, and 17. He had 27.2, 21.6, and 13.3 points in those final 3 games. And keep in mind, Pollard actually played in 2 of those games. He was dealing with an injury of his own, but he only had 4 targets in those 2 games. Tyjae Spears had 11. I don't know. I mean, I think that there's a lot to like here with Spears. He's only 24, just turned 24 years old. And here's the coach speak from Brian Callahan. This was from May 20th. He said, I think in a perfect world, it's a healthier division of labor. I really like both of these players a lot. I think we can do a better job of managing that load so they play a little more evenly. Now, take it with a grain of salt because Callahan said kind of the same thing last year. But again, he was injured. Spears was injured for much of the season. I think if he was healthy, we might have seen that more legitimate split between the two of them. Now, a split's not going to get you to the league-winning upside, obviously. But Tony Pollard, 28 years old, has had injuries of his own. It's not out of the realm of possibility that this becomes like a Chase Brown, Zach Moss situation. Like, I still think Pollard's good at football right now. But these things can change quickly. You remember last year how the season started out? Zach Moss getting a lot of work, Chase Brown playing a complementary role. Eventually, Chase Brown starts to phase him out, take on more and more of the work. And then obviously Zach Moss getting hurt really opened up the floodgates. But I think the same type of situation could play out in Tennessee. I'm not going to say it's the most likely outcome. I think it's a possible outcome. And then you also have to factor in Cam Ward as a massive piece of the puzzle here, right? If Cam Ward can hit as merely a competent quarterback, remember what they dealt with last year, Will Levis, Mason Rudolph, that is going to absolutely raise the ceiling for everyone in the offense because major quarterback improvements or just offensive improvements in general, that is a driving factor in a lot of breakout seasons. Think about what Jaden Daniels did for Terry McLaurin last year. Think about Derrick Henry leaving a bad Titans team to go to a really good offense in Baltimore, right? An offensive improvement can really be a driving factor in breakouts. So you layer on top of potentially better usage for Spears, the idea that Cam Ward could make this into a good offense or at least an average offense. I think that there's a lot to like here with Spears as an investment. We have proof of concept that he can be a fantasy monster in a lead role, mainly because of the receiving work. And the other running backs on the roster are Kalel Mullings, Julius Chestnut, and Tyrion Davis-Price. So like if it's not Pollard, it is Spears. And it's not even really Spears like in a committee. These other guys are absolute jags. Like they are genuinely terrible. So I don't know. A lot of the running backs that are valued around Spears right now, they're like true handcuff types, and very few of them have demonstrated the same type of receiving upside that Spears has. So he's a player I want to add more shares of, especially if I can do it without having to trade future seconds. All right, our last player today is Stephon Diggs, who's actually going one pick after Spears, 12-11, the wide receiver 56 in startups. First thing we needed to get to with Stephon Diggs, he tore his ACL last year and he's 30 years old. That's never really a good sign for any player. That's not what we want to see. But it was a clean ACL tear. There was no other ligament damage. For whatever it's worth, the videos that have been coming out of Diggs working out, running routes, they look really good. And he's expected to play in week 1 as of the time of this recording. So, as far as the run out from an ACL tear goes, pretty favorable. You look at the situation for Diggs in New England, he has basically no target competition. We like Kyle Williams as a 3rd-round rookie pick. He has an intriguing profile, but by no means is he guaranteed to be a real threat. And then you have Hunter Henry, Mac Hollins, Demario Douglas. There's nothing on this roster to prevent Stephon Diggs from earning targets. He can be the bona fide alpha there if he's capable of that. And then also in 2024, Diggs was actually better than I initially thought on a per route basis. Remember, he was playing with Nico Collins and Tank Dell at the time. He still managed 25% targets per route run, 1.97 yards per route run. That's very solid efficiency. It's not peak Stephon Diggs by any means, but it's not massive career-ending type of decline. That's still a very functional wide receiver. And you look at other wide receivers that have found success year 1 post ACL. I read this article by Matthew Betts of the Fantasy Footballers, which I'll try to link that down below. It's from 2022. He was talking about wide receivers coming back from ACL, and the big successes were Keenan Allen, Chris Godwin, Julian Edelman, and Cooper Kupp. And to me, those guys all have some pretty clear similarities. They're guys that win in the shorter areas of the field, right? Largely slot players, guys that get open quick. Diggs was lined up last year in the slot 52% of the time. And I think he could be used that way in New England too. I know they're talking up Pop Douglas right now, but again, Stephon Diggs is the one that got the money. He has the pedigree. They're going to want to get him the ball as much as possible. So I think that kind of bodes well for his return, is just how he wins, how he gets open, what areas of the field he gets open on. I want you to think back to 2022. Stephon Diggs on the Bills, 151 targets, 27% targets per out run, 2.59 yards per out run. He scored 19.8 points per game. Now look, 2 full years later and an ACL tear later, it's fair to say that outcome is pretty unlikely, but at his price, you don't need that outcome to secure a big win. I can at least imagine a world where Stephon Diggs recaptures a 26-27% target share in an offense that desperately needs him. And I can picture this passing offense taking a step forward. I already believe in Drake May being a good passer, but if the rest of this offense, specifically the offensive line, can catch up to his ability, you add in some year 2 improvements, I think he could be a really good quarterback to pair up with Stephon Diggs. And Josh McDaniels, whatever you think about him as an offensive coordinator, we at least have some proof of concept that he can support an alpha wide receiver in his offense, because we saw age 30 Devontae Adams, he put up 1,500 yards with Derek Carr in a Josh McDaniels offense. So we have some proof of concept. There's no competition. The price is cheap. Diggs, to me, he's easily more interesting than Cooper Kupp, who is currently going ahead of him in startups. And I'd probably take Diggs over Deebo Samuel as well, who's going a full round ahead of him. We have just as much concern that Deebo Samuel is washed as Stephon Diggs, but I think the upside for Diggs is pretty clearly higher. And then after him, the position kind of falls off a cliff. You have Xavier Legette and Marvin Mims. They're technically young players. I don't really believe in them. And then you have useful low ceiling players like Darnell Mooney, Rashid Shaheed. I'm not opposed to rostering those guys, but they're a pretty low price to pay. If I'm looking for some genuine upside at the position, I think Stephon Diggs can offer that. Anyway, that's going to do it for today, guys. Those are my picks for league winning upside outside of the early rounds. As always, thank you for watching the video. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you enjoy my Dynasty content, please subscribe. Really goes a long way. And if you want even more Dynasty content from me, consider becoming a YouTube member by hitting the join button under this video or the link in the description. That'll get you access to my top 200 Dynasty rankings, weekly members only live streams here on YouTube, and private channels in the Pure Potential Discord where I talk about Dynasty all day long. Either way, I'll be back soon with another Dynasty video. Hopefully, I'll see you then.